All right, so here's my little study in picking the top. Picking when is a good time to get ready to short it if you're slightly nuts like me, right? This is what I look for, the way I kind of drill down when I'm looking at turning points in the market, right? So I start off with a bit of a longer time frame, right? I look at so weekly, right? Look at the bolly bands, the old Bollinger's, right? It's outside, okay? All right? When the markets are outside the Bollinger Bands, right? Particularly on a weekly, it doesn't happen that often, right? Like these, they're turning points. Turning points. Let's just go log scale to make it a little bit clearer here. You can see here, and these are just the wicks, right? But it's actually very rare for the markets to stay outside the Bollinger Bands for that long. And even this is actually, in the scheme of things, I'm trying to see, right, obviously here, that was a kind of COVID thing, clearly the big shock. This one was quite a big event. This was a 20% drop in the market, right? But it, literally 2 weeks, right? And it was back out. It was back turning point in the market when it kind of goes outside the Bollinger Band. Even here, it stayed up. It had a bit of a pause, right? Anyway, so that's one thing that I look at, the Bollinger Bands. Statistically, these I think it's 2 standard deviations, right? It's an outlier, right? So it's an outlier. Another one, overbought, right? Okay, it's overbought on the weeklies. Okay, next I go down to the dailies, and as you can see here, heavily overbought on the dailies. I'll start looking at some trends and to see how they line up on the overbought points there. Really starting there. Let's go through here. It could still have a long way to go. Let's take it off the log scale. Come up here. Here. That makes me wary, right? I guess we can draw these lines. They can be pretty subjective. You can draw them any way you want, right? If you draw them that way, from the last big overbought point to the next overbought point, that one. So that big one to that overbought to this overbought, right? Yeah, it's probably not a bad way of drawing that trend line. You've got to have some sense in terms of which points you pick on the line, right? Because you can cut out the noise, which I'm prone to do. You can say, well, it should be like that, right? But actually a reliable one I find is you're picking like the big overbought or big oversold kind of points in a bear rally. And you do get, that's an important line to touch. That's an important one to touch. And it touching here. Right, so that's next thing. So look at those RSIs on a daily and a weekly basis. Now if I drill down to like a 4-hourly, and I'll look at my little trend here. Go right. It is looking like it hasn't yet, but it could well be about to bust that trend, right? So I've got it hitting the top one here. We've got it outside the Bollinger Bands. We've got it still holding this, right? So it's coming up to a bit of a critical juncture here where it hits this trend line outside the Bollinger Band, overbought in the dailies, being supported by this trend line. And on the 4 hours, which I do like to trade, it is just doing that, right? Okay, it's not negative divergence actually, but it is coming off the boil. It's starting to turn. Alright, so that's the next signal. Then if I go down to like a smaller time frame, I can see on the 2 hourlies it has had again, not negative divergence, but it is certainly like heavily overbought and turned, and we are starting to see a pattern like this, which to me is a recipe to say it is going to break out, just by the fact that this is you know, it's winding down or winding up, depending on how you want to call it. Let's have a look on the 1 hourly. It still holds on the hourly. Let's finesse it a little bit. Right, you can just get the top of those candles there. Again, same coming off the boil on the hourlies. What does it look like on the 15 minutes? Yeah, still right, holding very true on that shorter time frame. Yeah, so to me, this is very much a time to watch the market carefully, because it is quite clearly getting ready for a break on pretty much all of those things that I have looked at. Yeah, so to me, this is, if it kind of breaks this line, then we could well be off to the races. But if it breaks down, then obviously we'll be breaking down, to state the obviously. I think it's this is a potential shorting opportunity for me, given that I'm always playing the futures from the short end, because my core portfolio in underlying equities is just long and leveraged up the wazoo. So that's how I look at these these points where I get in or out of a position. And for me, this is one I'm going to watch pretty keenly. As I said, on the RSIs, it's looking like a it's looking like a sell. On this trend line, it hasn't broken, so the assumption is it's still got to go up, but it is coming up against this longer trend line here. Okay, so if it follows this trend, it's come up to a critical juncture, and it is at a point in the Bollinger Bands where it doesn't hang around on the weeklies, where it doesn't hang outside those Bollinger Bands for that long. And to me, that is looking, so it can do this, right? It can just like slow down the pace of accelerating. But to me, it is ripe for a pullback to within this band here. 44.50 is in the middle of that that band. Let's see where 44.50 is on this. 44.50, yeah, right in there. Okay, and then the last thing that I'll look at is in terms of potential targets, is just on this little move. Right, well, what would you know? What do you know? That 38 retracement is the previous high. That looks a very likely target, all things considered. Well, I'm going to be watching this little one, and if I'm awake when it starts to turn, I'll lob a couple out. All right, ciao.